He heard the sound before he saw anything. A soft, broken cry coming from the backyard. Jason walked toward it slowly, not knowing what he'd find. But what he saw that day changed everything. His little boy, 6 years old, was curled up inside the old wooden doghouse. The same place he always ran to when the world got too loud. But this time, he wasn't alone. There, on her knees in the wet grass, was Elizabeth, the maid, a woman Jason barely noticed before. She wasn't speaking to Eric like a teacher. She wasn't trying to pull him out. She was just there, one hand resting gently on the ground, the other holding a stuffed dinosaur worn out, missing an eye. Her voice was soft, like something you'd say to a scared animal. He doesn't need fixing. He just needs to know he's not alone. Eric didn't run. He didn't hide. He looked at her. And in that quiet moment, with the sky heavy and the air still, something sacred passed between them. Jason stood frozen at the door. Because after everything they'd tried, after every expert, every therapy session, every dollar spent, it was this: a soaked maid, a toy dinosaur, and a whisper. That finally reached his son. Jason hadn't been home this early in weeks. He didn't even plan to come home early that day. Since the accident, he'd kept his distance, buried himself in work, tried to stay busy so the grief wouldn't swallow him whole. His wife was gone, and his son Eric hadn't spoken since. Most days, the boy barely looked anyone in the eye. He just disappeared into corners, hid inside closets, crawled into that little doghouse out back, and stayed there until it got dark. Nothing helped. Not the child psychologists, not the special schools, not even the soft-voiced therapists with degrees on their walls. Everyone said the same thing. He needs time. He needs space. But how much time? How much space can a 6-year-old handle before he forgets how to come back? That's what haunted Jason. And then, that day, he came home. He heard the crying. Not loud, just broken. Like something inside his boy was finally giving up. He followed it to the back door, and through the glass, he saw them. Eric, in the doghouse, and beside him, Elizabeth, just kneeling, not saying much, just holding that dinosaur like it mattered. And somehow, it did. Jason stood there, one hand on the door, watching, trying to understand what he was seeing. The boy wasn't screaming. He wasn't rocking. He wasn't hiding his face. He was listening. And the woman he barely noticed all these months, the one with no titles, no training, was the only person in the world his son trusted in that moment. And deep down, Jason knew. This wasn't just kindness. This was grace. Some people come into our lives like lightning, loud, bright, and gone too soon. But others, they come like rain, soft, steady, and they stay long enough for something broken to grow again. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever loved someone you couldn't reach, or prayed for a miracle in silence, this story is for you. So before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And may this story remind you that healing doesn't always come in a hospital. Sometimes it shows up in the form of someone who simply refuses to walk away. Let's begin. He heard it again. Not loud, not urgent, but enough to stop him where he stood. It was that kind of cry that doesn't come from pain but from something deeper, the kind of sound you feel before you understand it. Jason paused by the back door. It was open just a crack. The wind moved through it, soft and damp. That same cry carried through again, fragile, like a voice afraid of being heard. He stepped outside without thinking. The rain had started light and steady, soaking into the grass. His shirt clung to his back, but he didn't notice. Not yet. His eyes moved across the yard, searching, and then he saw it. The small wooden doghouse near the fence. The one Eric always ran to when the world became too much. His boy was in there again, curled up, knees to chest, hands pressed to the sides of his head. But this time, he wasn't alone. There beside the doghouse was Elizabeth. She was kneeling in the wet grass, her uniform already dark with rain. Her yellow gloves were still on. One hand rested on her knee. The other held something small and soft. Eric's old stuffed dinosaur. The one he used to sleep with. The one Jason hadn't seen since the funeral. She wasn't speaking loud. She wasn't calling his name. She just sat close, but not too close. Her head slightly bowed. Her voice quiet, steady, almost like she was speaking to the rain itself. "He doesn't need to be pulled out," she said. "He needs to know someone's willing to stay." Jason didn't move. He couldn't. He had seen doctors sit across from Eric with clipboards and practiced smiles. He had watched trained therapists try flashcards and strategies. He had paid for the best. But this was different. This was stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't demand anything in return. Eric wasn't screaming, wasn't rocking. He was listening. His face wasn't calm, but it was open. His eyes, wide and wet, stayed on her hand as she slowly set the dinosaur near the edge of the doghouse. She didn't push it toward him. She just let it sit there. An offering. Then she whispered again, "He can take his time. The roar comes back when it's ready." Jason didn't know what that meant. But Eric shifted. Just a little. One hand moved off his ear. He looked at the dinosaur, then at her. Jason felt something inside him twist. It wasn't the sight of his son moving. It was the quietness of it. The way the moment asked for nothing. And the way Elizabeth, a woman he barely noticed in his own house, seemed to understand a kind of language no one else spoke. He stepped back slowly, afraid even his breath might break whatever was happening. He leaned against the doorframe, letting the rain soak through his sleeves. He couldn't stop staring. At the toy. At the way her shoulders stayed relaxed. At the way she didn't flinch when Eric inched forward, just a little closer to the edge. A part of Jason wanted to interrupt, to ask what she was doing, to ask how she knew to do any of this. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew. This wasn't something that could be explained. This wasn't a technique. It was presence. It was kindness. And maybe, just maybe, it was an answer to a prayer he stopped praying a long time ago. Elizabeth reached for something in her pocket. Not a toy, not a tool, just a folded piece of paper towel. She gently laid it over the dinosaur like a blanket. Her voice barely rose above the sound of the rain. "He's cold," she said softly. "But he's not alone." Jason's chest tightened. He turned away before he could feel too much. Before the tears he hadn't allowed himself in months had the chance to fall. Inside the house, everything looked the same. But something had shifted. He didn't know who she really was, what her story was, or how she had managed to reach the boy that no one else could. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't forget what he saw out there. Not ever. And whether he liked it or not, she had just become a part of their story. Jason didn't speak to her that day. He couldn't. Something about what he'd witnessed made it hard to find the right words, like walking in on a sacred moment not meant to be interrupted. So he stayed quiet. But that night, as he sat alone on the edge of his bed, shirt still damp from the rain, he kept seeing it. The way Elizabeth had crouched there in the grass. The way Eric hadn't screamed or run. The way she hadn't rushed a single thing. It haunted him in a way that didn't hurt, but didn't feel easy either. He picked up the framed photo beside the bed. His wife. Soft eyes, tired smile, the last picture they ever took. The corners were worn now, he hadn't noticed that before. He pressed the frame to his chest. Not tightly. Just enough to feel something. The next morning, Elizabeth was in the kitchen. Quiet as always. Not avoiding him, not overly polite. Just moving through her tasks with a kind of rhythm that didn't need to be explained. She washed dishes slowly, letting the warm water run longer than most would. The same yellow gloves on. Same calm air about her. Jason lingered near the doorway longer than usual. Watched the way she folded the towel before drying the plates. Nothing rushed. Nothing mechanical. When she saw him, she gave a small nod, not a greeting, just an acknowledgement. He nodded back. He wanted to say something. Ask about Eric. Ask what she'd done, or how she knew to do it. But all he managed was, "You're early." She looked at the clock, then back at him. "I always come this time." Right. He didn't know that. He'd stopped noticing those things a long time ago. Eric didn't come out of his room that morning. That was normal. But the dinosaur was missing from the shelf by the window. Also normal lately, at least. What wasn't normal was that the cup of milk left outside the door the night before was empty. Jason noticed that too. That afternoon, Jason found himself home again earlier than usual. No reason. No schedule conflict. He just came. The backyard was quiet. No crying. No storm. But the doghouse had a folded towel over it now. Clean, dry, carefully placed. He stood there for a few moments, not moving, not expecting anything. Then he heard her voice. Soft. Somewhere nearby. Not singing. Just narrating. "Clouds look different today," she said, like she was talking to no one in particular. "Some of them look like animals. That one looks like a turtle. That one like a pancake." Jason followed the sound to the side of the house. Elizabeth sat cross-legged near the bushes, a basket of laundry beside her. Eric was close, not touching, not speaking, but there, leaning against the wall, picking at the grass with quiet focus. The dinosaur was beside him, wrapped in a hand towel like a blanket. Elizabeth didn't look at him directly. She just kept folding. "This one smells like sunshine," she said, holding up a warm shirt. "I think it got lucky." Jason felt something tight in his chest again. Not pain. Not grief. Something slower. Something he didn't have a name for yet. At dinner, he asked his assistant to cancel the next day's meetings. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. That evening, as Elizabeth was leaving, she passed by Jason in the hallway. He stopped her gently. "Elizabeth." She turned, waiting. He looked at her for a long second, then asked the question he'd been carrying all day. "Why do you do it like that? Just talk like that? Not to him, just around him?" Her answer was simple, and somehow it undid something inside him. "Because he still hears the world," she said, "even if he doesn't answer it." Jason nodded slowly. No more questions. No more words. She left without anything else needing to be said. Later that night, Jason stood by Eric's bedroom door. It was cracked open. Inside, the light from the hallway barely reached his son's bed, but he could see the silhouette. Small, curled up. The dinosaur was tucked under one arm, the hand towel still wrapped around it. Jason didn't walk in. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a while and listened. He didn't hear words, didn't expect them, but he felt something. Something shifting, something opening, and for the first time in a long time, he stayed. The morning started quiet. No thunder, no crying, just the low hum of a normal day trying to begin. Elizabeth was in the kitchen. The windows were fogged from the warmth of the stove. She moved slowly, like she always did, no rush, no noise. The kettle whistled softly as she poured hot water over a tea bag. Chamomile, same as always. She opened the cupboard, reached for the familiar chipped mug. It was placed just above Eric's plate, the one with the green rim. She paused, then pulled both down. 2 cups, 2 places at the table. Jason came downstairs just after 7. No tie, no phone in his hand. He looked at the table and paused when he saw the extra cup. Elizabeth didn't explain. She just placed the teapot down between them and said, "I made toast." He nodded. They sat in silence, not uncomfortable, just careful, like people learning how to exist in the same moment again. He almost said something about the weather, but stopped. There was something about the stillness that didn't need small talk. Footsteps. Small, bare, hesitant. Jason looked toward the hallway. Eric stood there, just outside the kitchen, hair a little messy, pajamas still wrinkled from sleep. His eyes didn't meet theirs. His hands stayed close to his chest. But he didn't run. Elizabeth didn't move. She didn't say his name, didn't smile big. She just reached for something behind her chair. A soft towel. Folded. Wrapped around the dinosaur. She placed it on the floor beside her, then went back to buttering toast. Jason didn't breathe. Eric stepped forward. One slow step. Then another. He didn't come all the way to the table, but he picked up the toy, held it against his chest like it was something precious. Then, he did something neither of them expected. He sat down. On the floor. Right there in the kitchen. Just beside Elizabeth's chair. Not saying a word. Not asking for anything. Just being near. Jason felt the heat rise in his throat. He looked away, pretending to reach for his coffee. His hands weren't steady. Elizabeth didn't look down. She just passed a small plate to the edge of the table near the floor. Toast. Cut in triangles. No crust. The way she'd seen it left uneaten before. And then it happened. A sound. Soft. Like a breath, trying to become a word. Jason froze. Turned slowly. Eric had one hand on the plate now. The toast untouched. His lips moved, barely. No real volume. Just air. But the sound was there. And then he said it again. Green. One word. Breathless. But real. Jason blinked hard. Did he? He started, but his voice broke. Elizabeth nodded. Just once. It's the gloves, she whispered. He always watches them. Jason looked down at her hands. Still in yellow rubber. But now damp, the green, starting to show through from inside. He swallowed hard. His son had spoken. For the first time in nearly a year, and the word he chose wasn't Dad. It wasn't help. It wasn't please. It was a color tied to safety, to presence, to someone who hadn't rushed, hadn't demanded, hadn't left. Jason stood up too fast. His chair scraped the floor. Eric flinched. Just slightly. Jason froze. Hands open. Voice low. I'm sorry, he said. Elizabeth didn't say anything. Eric looked up at her, then back at his plate. His hand stayed on the dinosaur. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Jason didn't go into the office. Didn't make a single call. He just stayed. He watched from the living room as Elizabeth read aloud from a cleaning label. Nothing special. Just ingredients. She made it sound like a story. Sodium bicarbonate, she said gently. Smells like clean things. Like mornings. Eric sat by the door. Not too close, but listening. Jason listened too. That night, as the house settled into its soft quiet, Jason opened a drawer in the kitchen, found a green pair of gloves still in the packaging, set them aside. He walked upstairs, past Eric's room, stopped at the door. He didn't knock, didn't go in, but he whispered, Green, it's a good color. He waited a second, then walked away. Behind the door, the dinosaur lay beside the pillow, wrapped in a towel, held close. It had been 3 days since Eric spoke. One word, still the only one. Jason hadn't tried to push it, but something inside him was restless. Not impatient, just unsure of what to do with the silence, now that it wasn't empty anymore. He started coming home earlier. Sometimes mid-afternoon. Sometimes before lunch. He never announced it. He just showed up. And she was always there, in the same quiet rhythm, folding laundry with the radio off, talking to Eric like the world was listening, narrating the sky, naming the colors in the garden, letting silence speak when it needed to. Jason watched it all from a distance. The soft way she moved through their space, the way Eric no longer hid the moment he heard footsteps, the way his fingers sometimes brushed the edge of her apron when she walked past, not grabbing, just checking. And yet, Jason hadn't said much to her. Not really. Not about this. Not about what was happening to his son, to him. He didn't know how. That morning, the house felt heavier. Clouds hanging low outside. No rain yet, but the kind of sky that makes you move slower without meaning to. Elizabeth was in the kitchen. Eric sat on the floor again, building towers out of paper towel rolls. He didn't look up when Jason walked in, but he didn't stop what he was doing either. Jason poured coffee, stood by the counter, back turned to them. Then he asked, low, "Do you think he remembers her?" Elizabeth didn't answer right away. She crouched down beside Eric, handed him another roll, watched him stack it carefully, then let her voice follow the silence. "He remembers love," she said, "even if he doesn't call it that." Jason didn't turn around. He just nodded once and stared into the dark surface of his coffee. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. That evening, something cracked. It wasn't loud. Not a fight. Not even a raised voice. It was just a moment. Sharp. Quick. And enough to shift the ground beneath them. Jason was on a call in his office. The door was half open. He didn't think anyone was around. His voice was tired. Tense. "No, I can't commit to the fundraiser yet," he said. "Things at home are complicated. My staff's been filling in gaps while I sort things out." He paused, sighed, then added, "The maid's good with Eric, surprisingly good, actually, but she's not permanent, just temporary support until I can find someone trained." He didn't mean anything cruel by it. He was just trying to explain something he didn't know how to explain. But the words were out, and behind him, just outside the doorway, Elizabeth had heard every syllable. She didn't say anything. She just stood there for a few seconds, then walked away. Later, when Jason came downstairs, the house was quiet. Too quiet. No soft narrating. No paper towers. No humming from the laundry room. He found Elizabeth in the hallway, packing a basket with folded towels. She didn't look up. He opened his mouth to ask, to explain, to say something, but nothing came out that felt right. So she spoke first. "I won't be here tomorrow." She didn't explain. She didn't accuse. She just said it like a fact. Jason felt something tighten in his chest. "You're leaving?" he asked. She paused, then looked at him. "I'm still the help, Mr. Smith. I heard you say it. You don't owe me more than what I've already done." His mouth opened again, then closed. "Because what do you say to someone who gave your son the first piece of himself back? How do you tell them that their name means more than their title, when you were the one who forgot to say it?" He nodded once. Barely. Ashamed. She picked up the basket, walked past him. Eric watched from the living room floor, still holding the dinosaur. Eyes wide, sensing a shift he couldn't name. She gave him a soft smile. "I'll see you soon," she whispered. Then she left. Jason stood in the hallway, the space around him hollow, and all he could hear was the sound of silence coming back again. The house felt different by morning. Still, but not the kind that made you feel safe. The kind that made you notice everything else that was missing. No sound from the kitchen. No toast. No soft voice narrating the weather. No humming under breath. Just silence. Jason sat at the table with his coffee growing cold. The chair across from him, empty. He kept glancing at it, as if it might fill itself again. He didn't know how long he sat there. Upstairs, Eric hadn't left his room. Not even when Jason knocked. The door stayed shut. No toys scattered in the hallway like usual. No quiet footsteps on the stairs. Nothing. By noon, Jason had opened his laptop 3 times, closed it again 3 times, tried to work, failed. He checked his phone. No message. He didn't expect one, but a part of him wanted to explain, say something, undo something. Instead, he stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, just listening. Still silence. Around 3 o'clock, the first scream came. Not loud, but sharp. Jason dropped his phone, ran up the stairs without thinking. Eric was under the bed, face pressed to the carpet, his little body shaking, one hand clutching the dinosaur so tightly it looked like it might tear. Jason dropped to his knees. Hey, buddy, it's okay, I'm here." Eric didn't move, didn't respond. His breath came in short bursts, like he couldn't catch it. Jason reached under, touched his foot gently. But Eric yanked away. Curled tighter. Jason froze. He felt helpless, heavy, and for the first time in months, afraid. He sat back, hands on his thighs, trying to figure out what to do. What Elizabeth would have done. He thought of her voice, how she never told Eric what to feel, how she just sat with him, let things be quiet without filling the silence. So that's what he did. He leaned against the side of the bed, didn't speak, didn't reach. He just stayed. Minutes passed, then more. The crying slowed, not because it was over, but because it couldn't last forever. Jason stayed there until Eric's breathing evened out, still curled up, still not coming out, but calmer now. Jason rested his head against the mattress, whispered, "She didn't leave because of you, buddy." He didn't expect an answer, didn't get one, but somehow saying it mattered anyway. That night, Jason sat on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing. Then he stood, walked down the hallway, into the laundry room. He found the green gloves still hanging by the sink, folded neatly, left behind. He picked them up, felt the weight of them in his hand. They smelled like lemon soap and something else, something steady, something safe. He held them against his chest, let his eyes close, and said, quietly, almost like a prayer, "I didn't see her. Not the way he did. Not the way I should have." The next morning, Jason didn't go to work, didn't dress up, didn't rush. He made toast, poured a small cup of warm milk, cut the crusts off, just like she used to. He placed the plate on the floor beside the table, sat in the same chair he always did, waited. The clock ticked. The house stayed still. But then, a small sound. Feet. Eric stepped in slowly, holding the dinosaur. He looked at the spot on the floor, then looked at Jason. Didn't smile, didn't speak, just sat down. Right there, on the floor. Jason exhaled. Not a sigh, just relief. He looked at his son for a long moment, then said softly, "I miss her too." Eric looked up, and for the first time in days, he nodded. Just once. But that was enough. The next 2 days passed with nothing said about her, not between Jason and Eric, not in the corners of the house where her presence used to live. But her absence was everywhere. The towels folded the wrong way, the quiet that didn't hum anymore, the toy dinosaur still wrapped in the towel she last touched. Jason kept telling himself he was giving it time. But time, he was starting to realize, wasn't always kind. Sometimes it just let you sit in your mistake until it got too heavy to hold. Eric had started withdrawing again. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The first sign was the toast. He stopped eating it, left the plate untouched on the floor, even though Jason made it exactly the way Elizabeth did. The second was his eyes. They stopped following sound, stopped noticing when Jason walked into the room, stopped pausing for the little routines they'd been building. Then came the third. He stopped holding the dinosaur, just laid it on the floor beside him, left it there like it didn't mean anything anymore. And that was when Jason felt it break. Not Eric, himself. He stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching the boy lie on the carpet, facing the wall. The toy left untouched, his small body still, like he was trying to disappear into the quiet. Jason didn't speak. He just sat down against the wall, head leaning back, breath caught between guilt and helplessness. He stayed like that for a long time, until the sun moved across the window, until it got hard to sit still. Then, without a plan, without a script, he said, "I think I made a mistake." No response. But he kept talking anyway. "I should have said something. I should have told her she mattered, that you needed her, that I did." His throat tightened. He swallowed hard, but the lump didn't move. "I let her think she was temporary, and maybe that's how I've treated a lot of people." Still no sound from the other side of the room. But Jason kept going, softer now. I didn't know how to ask for help. Not after your mum died. I thought if I just kept working, if I just held everything together, the pain would leave on its own. He let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but as space. Space for something to rise. Then, softly, a shift. A small hand reaching for the dinosaur again. Holding it. Not tight. Just holding. Jason didn't move. Didn't breathe too loudly. He just watched. And in that tiny motion, the truth landed. What broke wasn't the boy. It was the thread of trust between them. And if Jason didn't move now, didn't do something real, it might not come back. That night, he stood in the kitchen staring at his phone. Screen lit. Her name pulled up. Message box open. He'd typed out 4 different versions. Deleted them all. Then, slowly, he wrote the only words he hadn't tried yet. You were never just the help. You were the only one who stayed long enough to be heard. He asked for green again today. I think he meant you. Please, come back. He stared at it for a long time. Then hit send. The next morning, there was no reply. Jason checked his phone 5 times before noon. Watched the driveway. Watched Eric. Still no word. Still no change. Until early evening. When he opened Eric's door, expecting the same stillness, he saw something different. The dinosaur, dressed in a paper towel cape, and next to it, a green rubber glove. Jason blinked. Walked in slowly. Knelt beside it. Did you do this? He asked gently. Eric nodded once. Jason smiled, but it didn't reach all the way to his eyes. His heart ached in a way he hadn't felt since the funeral. You miss her too, he whispered. Eric looked down. Then up. Then reached into his shirt pocket. A crumpled crayon note. Folded 3 times. Jason opened it slowly. Inside, drawn in uneven strokes, were 3 figures. 1 big, 1 small. And in the middle, a stick figure with green gloves. No faces. Just hands holding. Jason didn't cry. Not loudly, but his shoulders did shake. That night, he sat at the table, waiting. Not for dinner. Not for a phone call. But for the right thing to rise in his chest. The kind of thing you don't say with ego. The kind of thing you say when it's almost too late. Come back, he whispered again. This time, to no one. And to everyone. The house hadn't changed. Same walls. Same furniture. Same light through the kitchen window. But something inside it felt different now. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes when something important is missing, and everyone knows it. But no one has the words yet. Jason moved slower that morning. He didn't check his email. Didn't pour coffee right away. He just stood by the counter, hands resting on the edge, watching the sky outside shift from grey to gold. Eric sat at the kitchen floor again. Quiet. Dinosaur in his lap. 1 glove beside it, green, wrinkled, too big for his hand. But he placed it there anyway. A symbol. Or maybe a memory he was trying to hold on to. Jason watched him for a long time. Not as a father trying to fix. Not as someone waiting for a miracle. Just as a man learning to see what was always there. By late afternoon, he'd made a decision. Not one he'd prepared for. Not one he knew how to carry. But something in him, maybe the part that had been buried since the funeral, was starting to stir again. Not loudly, not confidently, just enough to move. He drove without music, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own thoughts whether you wanted to or not. He didn't know exactly where she was. Only the street her application had once listed. A small apartment complex 2 towns over. He remembered it because it seemed too small. Too normal for someone who had made so much happen without ever asking for credit. He parked on the side of the building. Sat in the car for a while. There were kids riding bikes in the parking lot. Someone grilling 2 balconies up. Normal life all around him. He realized, in that moment, how far away his world had become from this, and how much he'd missed by trying to outrun grief with wealth, with plans, with schedules. He didn't knock right away. He stood outside her door, tried to find words that didn't sound like apologies, words that didn't sound like rescue. Because this wasn't about asking her to come back. This was about seeing her for the first time. When the door opened, she looked surprised, not angry, just unsure. Jason took off his hat, held it in his hands, like someone showing he didn't come to argue. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. There was a pause, longer than it needed to be, but honest. Then he finally said, "I didn't come to fix anything." She nodded once. Didn't invite him in. Didn't close the door either. So he kept going. "You were right. About what you said. This house didn't know how to keep you safe. And I didn't know how to value what I didn't understand. Still, no interruption. I thought my job was to manage things. I didn't realize what it meant to stay. What it cost you to sit in that rain with him. To keep showing up with no promise of return." She looked down, hands crossed lightly at her waist. Her eyes didn't soften, but they didn't close either. "He's different without you," Jason added, his voice quiet. He stopped eating his toast. He stopped holding the dinosaur. "And this morning, he drew you. Just a figure with green gloves." He exhaled, then finished. "But I didn't come here to ask you to come back. I came to tell you, you mattered. To him, and to me. And I should have said it when it counted." Silence. Then a breath. Her shoulders lowered just a little, like she'd been holding something too long. "I didn't leave because of Eric," she said gently. "I left because I couldn't carry both of your silence at the same time." Jason blinked. That truth hit deeper than anything he'd heard in months. "I know," he whispered. "I hear it now." Another long moment. Then she stepped back slightly from the door. Not an invitation, just a soft space. Enough room to breathe. Enough room to hope. Jason didn't ask to come inside, and Elizabeth didn't invite him. They stood there, facing each other in the soft hush of the evening, like two people who'd been carrying the same pain from opposite sides of a wall. There was no more explaining to do, no more fixing. What needed to be said had already been said. But healing, real healing, asks for more than words. It asks for truth, and time, and choice. She spoke first. "If I come back, I'm not coming back as help." Jason nodded slowly. "I wouldn't ask you to." Her voice stayed calm, but steady, measured, like she was reading from a promise she wrote to herself. "He needs more than affection. He needs structure, support, safety. I'm not enough on my own, and I shouldn't have been asked to be." Jason looked down, hands folded. "I know," he said. "You carried more than anyone should have had to." She took a slow breath, not to calm herself but to stay grounded in what mattered. "If I come back, we do this differently. No secrets. No silence. I want a voice in what happens with him. I want routine. Logs. A real support plan. Not just me, guessing." Jason's eyes met hers. No resistance. Just something open, humbled. "Okay," he said. "Whatever you need." She paused. "Not what I need. What he needs." Another pause. "But I won't stay if I'm treated like a tool." Jason nodded. This time, firmer. "You won't be." Silence filled the space again, but not the kind that cuts, the kind that heals, the kind that allows two people to stand in their truth and not look away. She returned 2 days later. Not in uniform, not quietly. She rang the doorbell, and when Jason opened the door, he didn't stand in front of her. He stepped aside, let her walk in without permission like someone who belonged. Eric was by the stairs, sitting, not rocking, not hiding, just waiting. When he saw her, his body tensed not in fear, but in disbelief, like he wasn't sure it was real. She crouched slowly. No big smiles, no loud greetings, just soft eyes, and a whisper. "You didn't break it," she said. "I was always coming back." He didn't move, didn't run into her arms, but he crawled forward, placed the green glove beside her foot, and then did something he hadn't done in weeks. He leaned his head against her knee. Not a hug, just closeness, just trust. Jason watched from a few feet away. He didn't interrupt, didn't step forward. He knew this wasn't about him. It was a moment between them. And maybe it always had been. They sat down later that afternoon. Not for a meeting, for a plan. Not in the office. At the kitchen table, Elizabeth brought out a notebook. Jason brought tea. Eric brought the dinosaur. They made a list of routines. One for mornings. One for bedtime. One for how to handle the hard moments when Eric shut down or disappeared behind a wall no one could see. Jason listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, his voice stayed low. Not from fear, but reverence. I think I stopped seeing the boy and started seeing the problem. And I think you never did that. Elizabeth didn't answer. She just kept writing. A moment passed. Then Jason added, "He sees you as home." She looked up. Eyes full, but steady. "Then we build one that's safe enough to stay." That evening, Jason took Eric out back. The sky was dim, the grass still damp from the morning rain. He knelt beside the old garden where his wife used to plant roses. The petals were long gone now, the soil overgrown, forgotten, but not empty. Not if he could help it. Eric stood beside him, barefoot. Jason pointed to a small wooden sign he'd made earlier that day. Eric traced the letters with his fingers. "Sensory garden." Jason smiled. "You and Liz, you tell me what goes here." Eric didn't answer, but his hand reached into his pocket, pulled out a crayon, green, and without a word, he began to draw in the dirt. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, watching, her hand resting gently against the frame, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Not because it was over, but because something new was beginning. Fridays became a rhythm, not a rule, not a plan, just something that started to happen, like the sun showing up after too many days of rain. Pancakes in the morning, 1 cup of syrup, 2 mugs of tea. Elizabeth wore the green gloves, even when she wasn't cleaning. Eric noticed every time. Never said it out loud, but his fingers reached for them without thinking, like they were part of his morning. Jason never asked for much on Fridays. He just watched. Watched how the silence wasn't heavy anymore, how Eric moved more freely, how Elizabeth didn't narrate as much now. Not because she'd stopped trying, but because she didn't have to fill every gap anymore. Some of those spaces had healed. One afternoon, as the day stretched toward evening, Jason found a stack of paper tucked in a drawer by the fridge. Elizabeth's handwriting. Pages and pages of notes. Not for him, for Eric. Lists of his favorite textures. Colors that made him pause. Scents that calmed him. Sounds he didn't flinch at. There was one entry that stopped Jason cold. Lavender. Reminds him of her. Not me. His mom. I just hold the space when the smell comes back. Jason folded the paper in half, held it in his hands like something sacred, then walked out back, past the empty garden bed. He stood there for a long time, then began pulling weeds, one by one. They built it slowly, together. A sensory garden. Not flashy, not perfect, just real. Lavender, smooth stones, wind chimes. A small patch of moss Elizabeth found on a walk and brought home in a jar. Eric helped choose every piece, sometimes with words, sometimes without, sometimes just by the way he stood a little longer in front of one thing, how his fingers brushed it like it held a memory. Jason didn't try to lead. He followed, and in that following, something inside him softened. He stopped trying to father from a distance, stopped managing the pain like it was a business decision. He began to listen. Really listen. Not for words, but for presence. The kind Elizabeth had offered since the beginning. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the trees, Elizabeth walked Eric through the garden barefoot, his small hand in hers. the dinosaur tucked under his arm, green crayon in his pocket. They moved slowly. No rush. No music. Just the quiet kind of peace that only comes after everything has been shaken and somehow still held. Eric paused by the lavender, breathed in deep, then whispered, "Mum's smell." Liz smile. Elizabeth's eyes filled not with tears, but something steadier, something holy. She crouched beside him. "She'd be proud of you," she said gently. "You kept going, even when it was hard." He didn't speak, but his hand squeezed hers. Hard. Jason watched from the porch. He didn't step forward, didn't interrupt. He knew now. Some moments weren't his to own. He just folded his hands, let the quiet in, and thanked God for second chances. Later that night, after the dishes were done and Eric was tucked in, Elizabeth stepped into the kitchen to grab her bag. But something on the fridge caught her eye. A piece of paper, a drawing, 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and, in the middle, one wearing green gloves with a soft green heart drawn beside her. No words, no caption, just love in its simplest form. Jason came around the corner, saw her looking. He didn't say anything, just leaned against the doorway, watching her watch it. Then, quietly, he said, "You weren't just what he needed." She turned slightly. "You were what we needed, and I don't think I ever said thank you." Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment, then placed her hand over the drawing. "You don't need to. You stayed. Some stories don't end with a big moment. No grand speeches. No final line that wraps it all up. Some stories end with a quiet room, a safe hand, a green glove resting on the kitchen counter, and the soft hum of someone finally being seen. This was one of those stories. Not perfect, but whole. And in the end, whole was enough.